Bapak dan Ibu hadirin sekalian, sekali lagi selamat datang di kegiatan penutupan program Regional Raoul Wallenberg Institute. Sebagai pengantar dari pokok acara kita pada pagi hari ini, kita akan mendengarkan paparan terkait studi dampak Regional Asia Pacific Program yang akan disampaikan oleh Victor Bernard, Research and Mill Officer dari Raoul Wallenberg Institute. Kepada Victor, kami persilakan.
All right. Hi. We can all hear me? Yeah? Okay. And do you think I can get the PPT on there? All right. Good morning, everyone, and selamat pagi, sawasdee krap. I would just like to reiterate Jason's thanks to everyone for joining us here today, both offline and online, at this Raoul Wallenberg Institute's end of program event that marks the conclusion of our 7-year Regional Asia Pacific program, the RAPP, on human rights and sustainable development. We have a number of interesting events or panel discussions lined up for you today, where we will discuss the evolution of the human rights and environment discourse, as well as take stock of the wide-ranging strategies and best practices adopted by stakeholders across the region since 2017. My role here today is to set the scene for these discussions by presenting RAPP's results and impact at the outcome level, drawing from the examples and information that will be featured in RWI's upcoming impact study. This study synthesizes and analyzes the evidence and findings that emerged from RWI's monitoring, evaluation, and learning activities, which were spearheaded by myself and my predecessors, Ms. Dina Kusumaningsi and Mr. Anton Fatah, both of whom deserves credit for this work. The evidence and data were solicited from both qualitative sources, including tracer studies, focus group discussions, surveys, and most significant change interviews, and quantitative sources such as RWI's participants database. Once published, the report will be shared with all of you to not only showcase what is possible with a small and agile team like RWI, but also what we should be continuously work on collectively moving forward. If I could go to the next slide. Oh, that, perfect. So this is the outline of my presentation. I will first introduce the RAPP program and its outcomes. I will then give a snapshot of the program, of the preliminary qualitative and quantitative results from the impact study. And finally, I will move on to presenting some preliminary findings and testimonials from RWI's impact study across the program's 4 thematic foci, namely disaster, climate, and displacement, localizing human rights in the SDGs, human rights and environment, and the public discourse on human rights and environment. Go to the next slide, please. So about the program, the Regional Asia Pacific Program is a 7-year program that started in 2017, funded by the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. The overall objective was to contribute to a just, inclusive, and sustainable development in the region through the mutually reinforcing protection of human rights, gender equality, and the environment. And we contributed to this through the 4 outcome areas I just presented to you earlier. So if we could go to the next slide, please. These are just some preliminary results taken from the report, which will be published and shared with you all in due course. Overall, the RAPP reached 4,093 stakeholders from across the region between 2017 and 2023, amongst whom 43% were women and 40% men. These participants represented 39 countries from around the world. 90% of all participants identified themselves as nationals of a Southeast Asian country, whilst 4% were South Asian nationals and 0.5% were from the Pacific. The top 5 countries, as you can see to my left, were first Indonesia, accounting for over half of the participants, which is mainly due to our presence here. It's more convenient to invite Indonesian participants to our events in person, and our long-standing partnership with the DGHR for many of RAPP's activities. This is followed by Malaysia, accounting for 14%, and then Philippines and Thailand representing 4% and 3% respectively. And Indians were the 5th largest group, representing 1% of all participants. Next slide, please. 1/3 of RAPP's participants represented academic institution. Of course, we are an academic institution ourselves, or we represent an academic institution, so this is a natural result. And then another 1/3 of our stakeholder group were government institutions, including NHRI, so Komnas HAM, and judicial actors. The private sector comprised 13%, whilst local NGOs, international organizations accounted for 7% and 2% respectively. And as you can see to my left, this data was complemented by qualitative data from surveys, which was completed by 55 stakeholders over the course of, I think, 6 months. And some of the responses here were quite interesting. I'll just draw 3 of them, or I'll just draw your attention to 3 of them. 98% of the respondents indicated that RWS activities had contributed to their increased knowledge of the interlinkages between human rights and environment. 93% also said that the knowledge acquired had translated into tangible actions, whilst 86% reported that the RAPP activities had strengthened their collaborations and networks, which is a testament to the unanimous response, or to the unanimous perception that RAPP has had an impact at either an individual or an institutional level. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about the qualitative aspect of the report, divided into the 4 thematic foci. On the first outcome area, on disaster, climate, and displacement, the impact report highlighted that RWS activities had enriched the academic landscape on this theme through the production and dissemination of research, bolstering of formal collaborations with esteemed universities, the creation of academic networks, which was mentioned a couple of times earlier, such as the Asia-Pacific Academic Network on Disaster Displacement, and finally, the successful delivery of the blended learning courses on the human rights, climate change, and mobility nexus. One of the case studies that was highlighted in the report under this outcome area is based on the testimonial by a faculty member of the University of Gadjah Mada, UGM in Indonesia, who stated that the partnership between UGM and RWI, especially on co-developing course materials on applying human rights and gender-based approaches to disaster, climate change, and displacement, had resulted in human rights being, for the first time, officially integrated into their master's program on disaster management. In addition, UGM helped influence the disaster management curricula at their partner institutions, such as the University of Indonesia and the University of Budi Luhur, which have developed their own courses on rights-based approaches within their respective disaster management programs. Next slide, please. Moving on to the second outcome concerning localizing human rights and the SDGs, the impact study revealed that RWI has had a significant impact on improving local stakeholders' capacities and networks, which have enabled them to advance human rights, gender equality, and the SDGs at the local level. RAPP particularly affected change among policymakers and local actors through the development of research and practical guidelines, such as the flagship handbook on localizing human rights in SDG contexts, co-chairing the World Human Rights Cities Forum that covered over 7,000 cities across the Asia Pacific, the delivery of a series of blended learning courses for local government officials, NHRIs and CSOs on human rights and SDGs, and finally the support for youth-led dialogues that focused on youth, human rights, and climate change processes. The case that was highlighted in this study pertained to a municipality in Bangladesh called Takuragaon, and this pertained to the project on reducing and eliminating hazardous child labor. So following RWI support, the municipality successfully helped transition 216 children from child labor back to school. This community also set up community watch groups comprising diverse stakeholders that actively work towards a child labor-free municipality. And finally, the municipality adopted a resolution requiring entrepreneurs and companies to pledge to fight against child labor in order to get an operating license. These efforts exemplify how RAPP has helped institutionalize human rights-based approaches and SDGs in various contexts at the local level. If you could go to the next slide, please. And then moving on to the third outcome on human rights and environment. This is one of the outcome area I used to look after. The RAPP has had a significant impact in strengthening knowledge bases for relevant coalitions and networks by publishing a series of reference materials and reports, some of which inform policymaking at the regional and national levels, including the Prosperous and Green in the Anthropocene report, which you can find outside in the gallery walk. Second is the delivering of a series of blended learning courses and webinars. I think we have a couple of alumni here with us today. And this one target one stakeholder group, which comprised judges, prosecutors, lawyers, and national human rights institutions. And then the second group was businesses. The impact study included the testimonial from a BLC alumnus in Pakistan who stated that the knowledge he had gained from the BLC has been used in cases he has adjudicated as Director General Judicial. Whilst Pakistan's constitution does not recognize the right to a healthy environment as a standalone right, he and his team has actively worked to advance the jurisprudence on environmental protection and climate change by considering and emphasizing the other aspects of human rights, such as right to life and access to clean water, and ensuring that those can be extrapolated to environmental and climate cases. Next slide, please. So this is the last, but not the smallest outcome area on public discourse on the human rights and environment nexus. We have talked about this extensively, and the impact study has illustrated that RAPP's success in employing a diverse array of methods to catalyze public conversations on human rights and environment took place through these means. So we have disseminating and translating research products. Second is influencing public discussions at regional and global conferences, including COP under the UNFCCC. And then we also leveraged RWI's social media channels, which has increased its reach by 30% since 2017. And of course, co-organizing human rights campaigns through activism, including the Youth Talk events led by the ASEAN Youth Forum and the Human Rights Film Festivals. And the case that was highlighted in the report was, of course, the partnership we had with Minikino the Minikino Film Festival that offered grants to Asia-Pacific filmmakers that could best foster social awareness and spotlight human rights themes in relation to the environment and climate change issues through their films. This opportunity has inspired Minikino to diversify the available films at their festivals to include those that would contribute to the discourse on human rights and environment. So finally, next slide, please. Just to sum up my presentation, the Program Impact Showcase report demonstrates that RAPP has overall has affected change overall at the outcome level, especially in relation to enhancing knowledge bases, strengthening capacity on advancing human rights in different environmental and climate change contexts. It has also helped expand and bolster the networks of RWI's strategic partners and target stakeholders. Furthermore, RAPP's activities have contributed to the public discourse on the right to a healthy environment and the discussions on the need to integrate a human rights-based approach in order to catalyze climate action and environmental protection measures that are just and equitable. These achievements pave the way for the next phase of RWI's program, for which we are currently seeking funding. This new phase aims to leverage the best practices and the lessons from RAPP to advance the just transitions to a net zero, climate resilient, and nature positive society, which we hope will begin in the middle of this year. That's it from me, and I would also like to extend many thanks to our strategic partners and collaborators here in Indonesia as well as elsewhere, many of whom have played an integral role in the success of this program. Thank you so much, and I hand it back to Danang.
Terima kasih banyak Victor atas paparannya, dan karena telah menyajikan pengantar yang komprehensif bagi kita untuk masuk ke sesi diskusi panel pertama. Namun sebelum itu Bapak Ibu, saya mohon izin untuk mengingatkan terutama bagi peserta yang bergabung melalui platform Zoom bahwa kegiatan ini dilengkapi dengan fitur penerjemah simultan dari bahasa Indonesia ke bahasa Inggris, begitu pula sebaliknya. Maka bagi Bapak Ibu yang bergabung melalui platform Zoom, Anda dapat mengaktifkan fitur penerjemah melalui platform tersebut. Berikutnya Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, kita akan masuk ke sesi diskusi panel pertama yang berjudul Perkembangan Diskursus HAM dan Lingkungan di Asia Pasifik. Sesi ini akan membahas bagaimana diskursus HAM dan lingkungan telah berkembang di Asia Pasifik, termasuk juga kontribusi program regional Raoul Wallenberg Institute terhadap perkembangan tersebut. Sesi ini akan diampu secara langsung oleh Bapak Dr. Unang Mulkhan, Senior Business and Human Rights Specialist dari Foundation for International Human Rights Reporting Standards atau FIRST sebagai moderator. Kepada Bapak Unang kami persilakan.
Baik, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Terima kasih kepada RWI yang sudah memberikan kesempatan kepada saya untuk memandu, memoderatori acara yang sangat penting hari ini yang bertema perkembangan diskursus HAM dan lingkungan di Asia Pasifik. Kalau tadi Bapak Dirjen HAM, Dr. Dahana Putra, ada pantun gitu ya. Jadi sudah sebagai budaya kita untuk berpantun sebelum kita melanjutkan sesi. Nah saya tadi googling karena saya tidak pintar membuat pantun, jadi saya akan berpantun hari ini. Pagi hari makan kelapa, rasanya enak, bikin tertawa. Kita di sini berjumpa untuk acara yang istimewa. Baik, Bapak Ibu semuanya, isu perubahan iklim dan kebencanaan itu saat ini menjadi isu yang sentral ya dalam diskursus dan agenda terkait lingkungan hidup. Ada yang melihatnya dari pendekatan tradisional saja, di mana perubahan iklim dan kebencanaan hanya dikaitkan dengan masalah ekologi dan lingkungan. Tetapi ada juga yang melihat isu ini secara lebih komprehensif, holistik dikaitkan dengan isu lainnya, yaitu mencakup pertimbangan hak asasi manusia. Nah, kalau kita lihat fakta saat ini, perubahan iklim telah mengubah besaran dan frekuensi cuaca ekstrim. Hari ini kita berangkat tadi juga banyak yang telat karena hujan dan banyak di daerah lain juga sudah mengalami banjir. Nah, hal itu juga meningkatkan kerentanan terhadap bencana dan mengakibatkan kerugian sosial, ekonomi, dan lingkungan yang lebih luas. Sebagai contoh, perubahan iklim memberi dampak pada kelompok rentan karena ketergantungan mereka yang erat dengan sumber daya alam dan ekosistem. Kalau kita lihat misalnya masyarakat di daerah pesisir. Perubahan iklim juga mempengaruhi manusia dan komunitas yang terdampak secara negatif dalam konteks mata pencarian mereka, kesehatan, keselamatan mereka, sehingga menentukan keputusan mereka untuk apakah tetap tinggal atau mencoba mencari tempat tinggal yang lebih baik dengan pindah. Sehingga akhirnya diskursus tersebut menguat yang menyatakan bahwa hak asasi manusia dan lingkungan saling terkait. Baik, sebelum kita mulai berdiskusi dan saya memperkenalkan para panelis kita, bersama kita telah hadir Bapak Dr. Raditya Jati, Deputi Bidang Sistem dan Strategi Badan Nasional Penanggulangan Bencana, yang akan terlebih dahulu menyampaikan pengantar terkait perkembangan diskursus HAM dan lingkungan dalam perspektif penanggulangan bencana. Saya persilahkan Bapak Raditya Jati untuk memberikan pengantar 3 menit, silahkan Pak.
Terima kasih Dr. Unang. Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, selamat pagi, salam sejahtera buat kita semua. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mohon maaf ini mungkin tidak masuk dalam jadwal, tapi mungkin ini menjadi menarik bila mana memang ada satu aspek yang sebetulnya mungkin belum menjadi suatu perhatian bagi kita semua. Meskipun tadi Dr. Unang sudah menyampaikan. Nah, kalau kita perhatikan data di Indonesia selama 5 tahun ini ada 17.000 kejadian bencana. 98% dipicu oleh perubahan, hidrometeorologi. Yang belum tentu semua hidrometeorologi adalah perubahan iklim. 6 juta orang korban meninggal selama 5 tahun. 50% disebabkan oleh geological impact, artinya di situ adalah gempa bumi dan tsunami. Nah, kita perhatikan bahwa apakah iya kita hanya bisa memecahkan masalah kebencanaan, perubahan iklim, pembangunan yang berkelanjutan secara sektoral atau silo. Nah, Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, disinilah sebetulnya yang ingin kami kenalkan bagaimana sebenarnya mengintegrasikan semua secara komprehensif yang disebut dengan resiliensi berkelanjutan. Jadi dengan adanya unpredictable dan kompleksitas terkait dengan risiko bencana dan kita sebut adalah systemic risk, di situ ada cascading and collateral impact dari suatu kejadian bencana, makanya akan berdampak pada kemiskinan, livelihood dan seterusnya. Akhirnya SDGs tidak akan tercapai. Posisinya di mana sekarang perubahan iklim? Posisinya di mana adalah risiko bencana, dan posisinya ada di mana SDGs. Kalau kita perhatikan dalam suatu line, suatu garis, upstreamnya adalah pemicu adalah perubahan iklim, midstreamnya adalah risk reduction, dan kita yang akan kita target adalah SDGs sebagai downstream. Jadi kita nggak bisa melepas semua line itu semua terpisah-pisah. Nah, Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, di dalam Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction 2022 yang lalu di Bali, Indonesia mendapatkan kehormatan menjadi tuan rumah dengan UNDRR dan dihadiri 185 negara, dan di situ ada lebih dari 7.000 peserta. Dan waktu itu kesempatan pertama Bapak Presiden Republik Indonesia, Bapak Joko Widodo menyampaikan terkait dengan sustainable resilience. Apa sebetulnya sustainable resilience itu? 4 hal yang menjadi catatan penting bagi kita semua adalah yang pertama, bagaimana preparedness culture, budaya kita memahami kebencanaan. Bapak Ibu tadi hadir ke sini mengalami kemacetan karena budaya kita tidak mengenal bahwa kita siap menghadapi kemacetan karena ada hujan, mungkin menyebabkan banjir. Mungkin itu menjadi penting. Jadi preparedness culture menjadi penting bagaimana kita mengantisipatif, adaptif, dan mitigasi. Disinilah sebenarnya budaya ini menjadi kesadaran kolektif untuk kita perhatikan. Yang kedua adalah terkait dengan inovasi, sains, dan teknologi. Jadi sejauh mana kita memahami risiko itu melalui sains teknologi. Sains teknologi hilirnya adalah industrialisasi kebencanaan, di mana memang kita harus siap di bidang industri, di mana situ ada marketnya, ada pelakunya, dan ada regulasi yang mendukung itu semua. Artinya, Bapak Ibu sekalian, dengan adanya inovasi, sains dan teknologi, inovasi pembiayaan risiko juga harus ada. Makalah muncul insurance, risk transfer, pooling fund. Banyak sekarang inovasi-inovasi yang kita dukung, termasuk yang dikenalkan oleh OECD adalah catastrophe bond. Nah, Yang ketiga, ini terkait dengan bagaimana membangun resiliensi terkait dengan infrastruktur. Bangunan tahan gempa atau bangunan yang tahan terhadap kalau itu terjadi perubahan iklim yang dahsyat, apakah itu terkait dengan longsor maupun banjir. Kita tahu bahwa kejadian di Demak yang lalu bukan is not a natural disaster, it's a natural hazard. Di mana Demak adalah di hilir, tidak ada hujan tapi banjir. Kenapa bisa? Karena ada engineering, ada tanggul yang jebol. Artinya sejauh mana sekarang kita bisa mengantisipasi bahwa resilience infrastructure menjadi penting. Yang keempat adalah bagaimana mengintegrasikan semua dari perubahan iklim, disaster risk reduction atau disaster risk management, dan SDGs. Karena semua akan berkaitan. Selama ini kita membahasnya satu-satu. Bahkan di sini judulnya environment protection. Kita bicara di mana posisi environmental protection terhadap perubahan iklim dan disaster risk reduction dan capaian SDGs kita. Bapak Ibu sekalian, mari kita sama-sama, mumpung kita di sini adalah berpikir bagaimana sebenarnya ke depan, tidak hanya mengeluarkan delivering gagasan atau delivering concept and idea, but we're here to deliver the result. Bagaimana sebetulnya konsep sustainable resilience ini menjadi kesepakatan bersama. Tahun lalu di ASEAN Leader Declaration, Sustainable Resilience menjadi kesepakatan 10 negara. Jadi kita bersyukur karena diangkat di 2022, 2023 disepakati seluruh negara ASEAN bahwa Sustainable Resilience menjadi komitmen seluruh negara ASEAN. Ini suatu capaian yang luar biasa yang sebetulnya itulah hasil karya dari yang kita angkat dari Indonesia. Nah, Bapak Ibu sekalian, sekarang PR-nya bagaimana menurunkan itu menjadi suatu delivering of results. Pertama, bagaimana tata kelola itu bisa dilakukan. Siapa berbuat apa, siapa penanggung jawab. Kolaborasi artinya, multi pihak artinya siapa berperan di mana. Kemudian yang kedua adalah bagaimana finansial, pembiayaan itu posisinya di mana dan mendukung di mana. Apakah hanya mendukung climate change? Sekarang banyak dana-dana yang mendukung perubahan iklim. Tapi seberapa besar sekarang yang mendukung dana untuk perubahan, untuk pengurangan risiko bencana? Kita tahu impactful-nya adalah di korban jiwa. Dan tidak hanya itu, tapi ada kerugian ekonomi juga. Artinya sejauh mana sekarang risiko-risiko yang tinggi di Indonesia ini, apalagi kita bicara archipelagic negara kepulauan yang memiliki pesisir yang cukup luas, risikonya cukup tinggi. Nah, bagaimana pembiayaan risiko ini betul-betul kita kawal. Yang ketiga adalah masalah infrastruktur. Apakah pembangunan infrastruktur ini menimbulkan risiko baru? Kita bangga dengan bangunan-bangunan yang baru. Kalau lihat tahun 2009 masih ingat ada gempa bumi di Padang, ada pasar yang lama masih berdiri, pasar yang baru yang roboh. Artinya apa? Resiliensi infrastruktur menjadi penting. Inilah yang kita angkat. Yang berikutnya adalah bagaimana sebetulnya Science and Technology menjadi salah satu yang penting, artinya industrialisasi kebencanaan menjadi hal yang sangat penting. Apa ya kita harus mengandalkan import, equipment, science technology, satellite dari luar, atau kita bisa sebagai kemandirian teknologi kita ke depan. Dan yang terakhir sebenarnya kaitannya sama HAM adalah people centered. Karena target semua resiliensi yang berkelanjutan adalah at local level. Community adalah target utama dan subjek untuk kita bantu bagaimana membangun resiliensi bangsa kita itu sendiri mulai dari komunitas berbasis pada hak asasi manusia dan berkeadilan. Untuk itu, mari dalam diskusi ini kita sama-sama pikirkan bagaimana membangun resiliensi berkelanjutan ini menjadi suatu delivering of result. Terima kasih, saya akhiri. Selamat pagi, selamat berdiskusi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi Santi Om Namo Buddhaya. Terima kasih.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Dr. Raditya. Ya, beliau tadi sudah memaparkan ya secara singkat tetapi padat seperti itu ya terkait dengan framework yang lebih integratif, resiliensi yang berkelanjutan. Nah, beliau mengajak kita dari discourse ke action seperti itu. Jadi kita akan melihat bagaimana nanti para panelis kita juga menyajikan perkembangan wacana yang ada di Asia Tenggara maupun Asia Selatan dan juga apa saja yang sudah dilakukan oleh mereka. Nah, sehingga diskursus tentang HAM dan lingkungan sebetulnya sudah jauh berkembang di Asia Pasifik, termasuk terkait dengan capaian penting, tantangan dan terobosan yang telah terjadi. Baik panelis atau narasumber kita pagi ini akan berbagi studi kasus ya. Tadi dari pagi sudah disampaikan bahwa RWI sudah bekerja sama dengan para partner untuk melakukan riset ataupun kegiatan yang lainnya, dan juga perkembangan kebijakan dan praktik baik yang telah memainkan peranan kunci dalam bentuk kesadaran publik dan prioritas kebijakan terkait HAM dan lingkungan. Baik, tidak berlama-lama, saya ingin memanggil para panelis karena kita ada dua konteks ya, panelisnya ada online dan offline. Yang saya panggil duluan adalah yang offline untuk menemani saya di sini. Yang pertama adalah Dr. Harniati SH LLM, yaitu Direktur Kerjasama HAM Kementerian Hukum dan HAM. Silahkan Ibu untuk ke depan. Yes. Kemudian panelis kita yang kedua adalah Dr. Insinyur Dina Ruslanjari, MSI, Ketua Program Magister Manajemen Bencana Universitas Gadjah Mada Indonesia. Ibu di tengah. Ya. Dan saya akan memperkenalkan yang online, mudah-mudahan Bapak Ibu melihat di layar. Yang pertama adalah Hakim Sazib Said, Hakim Fehari dari Pakistan. Kemudian panelis kita, halo, Hakim Said, bisa ya mendengar, oke. Dan yang terakhir adalah Dr. Stelina Jolie. Dr. Stelina Jolie adalah Lektor Kepala Fakultas Hukum di Universitas South Asian University, India. Dan semua sudah join bersama kita? Dipastikan, oke. Sesi ini akan berlangsung sekitar 1,5 jam, yang mudah-mudahan 30 menit terakhir nanti kita ada sesi tanya jawab, karena di sini banyak hadirin yang representatif dari berbagai organisasi, baik yang online maupun offline. Tadi sudah diutarakan terkait dengan beberapa hal baik di konteks diskursus, kemudian action, dan panelis kita yang hadir kali ini adalah juga merupakan partner ataupun decision maker yang sangat kuat atau relevan di konteks human right dan lingkungan. Untuk itu saya juga tidak akan berlama-lama karena kita akan membuat waktu kita lebih efisien untuk memahami perspektif dari para panelis terkait dengan diskursus hak asasi manusia dan lingkungan hidup, yang berbagai usaha banyak yang sudah dilakukan untuk memperkuat kapasitas pemangku kepentingan untuk mengetahui akar permasalahan tadi. Kemudian juga apa kira-kira action untuk jangka pendek, jangka panjang terkait perubahan iklim, bencana dan degradasi lingkungan. Untuk itu, karena kita akan memfokuskan pada beliau yang online terlebih dahulu, jadi pertanyaan pertama pada Hakim Sazib Said ya. Jadi beliau adalah alumni dari Blended Learning dan posisi beliau ada di Pakistan. Jadi kita akan lihat perspektif di Asia Selatan, bagaimana Anda memandang hubungan antara hak asasi manusia dan isu lingkungan hidup, dan mengapa penting untuk mengatasi kedua secara bersama-sama. Jadi bagaimana menurut perspektif Anda, kemudian di dalam konteks di Asia Selatan, mungkin memberikan case study di Pakistan. Silahkan.
Good morning from Pakistan. I am Shahzab Saeed, District and Session Judge. I am the head of judiciary in a district in the province of Punjab, one of the 4 provinces. Thank you very much for inviting me on this in this extreme gathering. I think I will speak with the perspective of the uh, judiciary because I am a judge and I have been involved in adjudicating environmental cases. Uh, I think the interlinkage between human rights and environmental issues is a key factor because environment degradation often undermines the enjoyment of human rights, such as the right to life, health, food, water, and healthy environment. Unfortunately, word environment is not found in the Constitution of Pakistan. More than 100 countries in the world guarantee the right to a healthy environment in their constitution. Pakistan, unfortunately, is not one of them. But Constitution of Pakistan is not inert, but a living document which evolves with time and grows with time. The most significant features in the environmental landscape of Pakistan is the judicial activism that has responded to public interest environmental litigation on every aspect of environment, whether it is air, whether it is water. We have landmark judgments from the superior courts. A clean and healthy environment is fundamental to the enjoyment of various human rights, including right to life, health, pollution, climate change, and environmental degradation can directly threaten human health and well-being, violating these rights. Environmental degradation can compromise access to clean water and nutritious food, which are basic human rights. Displacement due to environmental factors can lead to violation of these rights and often disproportionately affects marginalized communities and can hinder their ability to participate in the decision-making processes that uh, naturally affects them. Yeah. Further, environmental degradation can have long-term consequences for future generations, infringing upon their rights to inherit a sustainable planet. Overall, recognizing and addressing the interlinkage between human rights and environmental issues is essential for promoting a sustainable development, protecting human dignity, and ensuring a just and equitable future for all. Thank you.
Ya, terima kasih Hakim Sasib Said. Tadi sudah mengutarakan bahwa interlinkages ya, keterkaitan antara human right dan isu lingkungan sangat penting, sangat erat di Pakistan dengan berbagai contoh, misalnya terkait dengan kondisi water ya, melihat dari aspek air. Nah, mungkin saya akan menanyakan lebih lanjut ya, kira-kira bagaimana Anda melihat masa depan untuk gerakan hak asasi manusia dan lingkungan ini, dan apa kira-kira opportunity atau kesempatan yang bisa dimasukkan atau bisa digunakan untuk kemajuan lebih dalam mengintegrasikan atau membuat ini tercapai atau orang memiliki concern ke sana.
Before I answer this question, I want to share that I attended a blended learning course way back in 2000. I think it was 2018 in Sri Lanka, Colombo. And I feel that it is very important to share that experience because it will help me to answer your question. I have been involved to promote the interlinkage between human rights and environment from the perspective of being a judge. I have a story to tell. I completed my law graduation in the year 1990, and I started practicing as an advocate. And for 19 years, I conducted law practice mostly on criminal side. I was also enrolled as an advocate of the Supreme Court of Pakistan. And believe me, during these long 19 years, I never conducted a case on environment in any court of Pakistan. And after 19 years of my practice, I joined the judiciary in the year 2009, when I was inducted as a judge through competitive examination. And for 8 years as a judge, I decided mostly murder cases and civil appeals, and not a single case of environment or climate justice. Suddenly, in February 2018, I was asked, or you can say that I was directed by the High Court. At that time, the Chief Justice of the High Court was Mr. Justice Mansoor Ali Shah, an icon on climate justice in Pakistan. And I was appointed as the chairperson of the Punjab Environmental Tribunal without any training or technical know-how on the subject. Even the composition of Environment Tribunal was not complete, as the third member, who was a technical member, was not appointed by the government for the last 4 or 5 years. And I had to work very hard. Without any training, without any knowledge, I was the chairperson of the Environmental Tribunal of one of the biggest district of Pakistan or province of Pakistan. But I was, fortunately, I was guided by my inspection judge, Honorable Mr. Justice Aisha Malik, who is Judge Supreme Court Pakistan now. And I tried to grip the subject through different judgments of the superior courts, as well as I took the help of Google, believe me, to acquaint myself with technical know-how on the subject. I think the trainings are very important. The capacity buildings are very important. And I was very lucky and fortunate that I was nominated by the High Court for this regional blended learning course for judicial institutions organized by the RWI of Human Rights and Law, and with the support of Swedish International Development Corporation. I attended that course in Sri Lanka, Colombo, Sri Lanka, in June 2018. It was the fourth course of series in connection with human rights and environment. And there were 26 participants from different countries of South Asia. The object of this course was to strengthen knowledge growth with regard to connection with human rights and environment, climate change, gender equality. And after completion of that course, I was awarded a course certificate. That completely changed my mindset, the way I perceive environment. I can quote an example. Before proceeding to Sri Lanka to attend the course, I heard the arguments in an appeal, Pepsi Cola International versus Punjab Environmental Protection Agency. I had shared the soft copy of that with the organizer. The Pepsi Cola preferred the appeal and challenged the condition incorporated in granting approval on the ground that it is based on malice. It was their case that installation of ambient air quality monitoring station is not the responsibility of the proponent, rather the responsibility of the agency. When I heard the arguments, I was about to allow the appeal, but I was nominated for this course, and I adjourned the announcement of the judgment till my return from this course. But as I stated earlier, that the training completely changed my mindset, and after arrival, I announced the decision and dismissed the appeal. Involving polluter's pay principles, that Pepsi Cola should bear the cost for pollution and observe that we have to take a lead to mitigate climate justice and climate change, and that the imposition of clause is not based on malice, rather it is the mandate of the EPA to impose the condition while granting approval as a protective measure for sustainable development. I worked there in the Environmental Tribunal for 1.5 years as a chairperson, and I was fully aware about the linkage of creating deterrence with fine and sustainable development. I conducted trial, which was a new phenomena in that tribunal, because at that time, before my posting there, the conviction based upon confessions was in vogue. I discontinued that practice. I conducted trials. I did not promote the culture of confession and imposing nominal fines on the basis of those confessions. After my transfer from that tribunal, I was appointed a district and session judge in different districts like Chakwal, DG Khan, and Bihari. And I, being the head of judiciary in that district, conducted seminars on environment to disseminate the information to public at large about the menace of climate change. I also took on board the environmental field formation of EPA at district level and ensure that every brick kiln in that district is using zigzag technology. I also compiled a book of judgments of environment tribunal. I have shared the copy of that book. So you have my point of view is that I will speak about the perspective of being judge. That training had changed my mindset entirely, my mindset. So my first point is that from the judge's point of view, these trainings are very important. These are vital. That can change me. Uh, and I started to look at the environment in a new way. I was not familiar with the word, even climate change. What is climate change? But after the training, I learned a lot. So I will thank you, RWI, for changing me and converting me into an environmentalist.
Ya, baik, terima kasih Hakim Sajid. Kita kasih applause dulu. Jadi atas sharing pengalaman bagaimana tonggak yang bersejarah ketika sangat terlibat di dalam isu human right dan lingkungan, dari kekuatan training yang mengubah paradigma atau mindset, dan tadi juga diceritakan bagaimana inisiatif-inisiatif yang spesifik yang muncul untuk mempromosikan hubungan antara hak asasi manusia dan lingkungan. Dan kita akan bergeser melihat dari perspektif peneliti, karena ada beberapa riset atau bagaimana kira-kira dari akademia melihat perspektif HAM dan lingkungan hidup. Saya akan bertanya pada Dr. Stelina Joly, bagaimana menurut Anda hubungan antara hak asasi manusia dan isu lingkungan, dan mengapa penting keduanya, dan kira-kira apa yang sudah dilakukan di dalam konteks integrasi HAM dan lingkungan, dan bagaimana mungkin untuk sharing beberapa temuan atau penelitian yang sudah dilakukan. Silahkan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yeah. A warm good morning to all of you. As you rightly said, my perspective mostly revolves around the research and the teaching process I have undertaken. Fortunately speaking, almost last 15 years I have been teaching, and the last 10 years with the South Asian University. So I have been exposed to various jurisdictions in the South Asia, and has learned a lot from whatever the students and the colleagues with regard to the South Asian, the lived experiences as far as the environmental issues are concerned. So my opinion on the interlinkage with the human rights environment, I'm sure we are all in the majority. The relationship is a very, very complementary and a very close and deep associations. Two reasons, it's reiterated again and again, whether it is the SDG goals or numerous reports and the studies definitely suggest that. The first point, of course, if you look at the international human rights law and also the constitutions of almost all the countries, which has recognized numerous human rights, whether it is right to life, development, livelihood, all these things will not be able to be achieved in the context if the environmental protection has not so taken place. So environmental law protection is definitely very important for the enjoyment of human rights, but then that relationship is not a one-way traffic. I think it's a reciprocal one. It's also important to understand that even environmental law protection will not be effective without adequate human rights safeguards. I'll highlight three aspects, especially which is there under Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration, which emphasizes on the certain procedural human rights, like of right to information, participation, access to justice. If these three procedural human rights are not being granted to the vulnerable and marginalized communities, even effective environmental law protection will not be possible. And it is like really glad to see that maybe, yes, there are problems with regard to implementation, but whether it is right to information or the liberalized locus standi rule through the public interest litigations, or the many of the South Asian jurisdiction has taken positive measures, at least in terms of the legislative provisions and also the judicial statements with regard to this. So this complementarity is also important, I believe, in the context of SDGs. In this context, I also remember the Justice Veeramantri, one of the judge of the International Court of Justice he's maybe single-handedly, one can say that one of the judge who really tried to promote the interlinkage between human rights and environment. In one of the cases, he opined that there is a right to development as a human rights, but at the same time, there is a right to environment. So somewhere this balancing of the right to development as a human right and right to environment as a human right has to come through that complementarity of sustainable development. And today we don't just talk about the sustainable development, but also we talk about the SDG, the goals. And SDG goals, I also wanted to highlight again, when I mentioned the procedural aspect. So if you look at the planetary crisis, whether in the form of a climate change, the pollution and the biodiversity issues, these are all going to threaten a whole lot of human development, which we have attained through all this process and years. And also it's going to affect the many of the cherished goals, which is there in the UDHR and other international covenants. And again, like, whether it is climate change, biodiversity, these all act as a kind of a threat multiplier, affecting conflict and also affecting the marginalized section, and in a way derailing whatever our efforts in terms of the 2030 agenda. So if you look at it closely, the 2030 agenda, I believe that's a real good mix of the interlinkage, which really talks about that the strong relationship between environment and protection matters. But here I also want to highlight that it's not enough to talk about that substantive kind of a relationship, or saying that yes, granting a certain rights to a certain communities are important, but also it is important that we talk about a lot of enabling ecosystem and the capacity building. For instance, in the context of gender or other marginalized section, it's not enough to say that yeah, they have a right to livelihood, they have a right to equality, but then it is important to see that they have been given that information, they have been given that capacity building, and also a kind of a procedural rights and enabling ecosystem is definitely created. But in all these things, I believe the human rights agenda or a human rights approach is very, very important, because normally a lot of environmental law conventions and the negotiation, they look at environmental law issues more from a scientific perspective and a kind of a neutral approach. But then we clearly understand that none of the environmental law issues are ever neutral, whether it's not gender neutral, it's not race neutral, it is not caste neutral, it is not class. And besides the global north and south, that the vulnerability. So there is a layered vulnerability. And that layered vulnerability can be addressed, or even can be looked at only through an approach where the individuals are at the center of that particular discourse. And I believe human rights approach and the human right linkage is the only way where the humans become the center of that. Otherwise, if we look at especially a lot of legal regime, whether it is at the international, domestic level, it is all the government centric, it is the state centric. So this linkage definitely has to be strengthened further. So I'll tell you an experience. Last year, my university, South Asian University, collaborated with the RWI, and we are almost in the final stage of bringing about a research volume on climate mobility in Asia Pacific. And the uniqueness of that particular volume is that this is contributed by the homegrown researchers, shared the lived experiences. Now, the book will, when it comes out, will be beautifully elaborated, the different layers of vulnerability, the challenges. So whether it is in terms of vulnerability, but they could be very active agents in terms of the resilience, the resettlement plan. So in all, whether it is in terms of vulnerability, in terms of action, I think in all the steps that the human rights has to come into existence. So these are, so in my answer short is that, yes, there is a very, very, high complementarity in terms of the human rights. And the idea is definitely well percolated among the academics and research. I believe maybe now the focus has to be shifting to the implementation and towards the localization of that. Thank you.
Ya, baik, terima kasih Dr. Selena Jolie yang sudah banyak memaparkan konteks keterkaitan ya antara HAM dan lingkungan, kemudian juga aspek SDGs tadi highlight bagaimana enabling capacity dan ekosistem itu harus dibangun, kemudian juga vulnerable people menjadi center atau pusat yang harus dilibatkan di dalam keterkaitan HAM dan lingkungan tersebut. Mungkin ada pertanyaan lagi ya, kira-kira apakah ada kesempatan atau tools atau ruang atau apa yang untuk mempercepat adanya ekosistem, kemudian juga memampukan kapasitas dari perhatian kepada vulnerable people tadi. Silahkan.
Yeah, thank you. So I definitely, there are tools and the opportunity to empower and the train the marginalized section so that they can participate much more in the environmental law decision making. So I will start with a couple of my experiences in terms of it. See, as I said, my the knowledge mostly stems from the teaching and research. But when it comes to the marginalized section and the capacity building, I believe it is very important to understand the lived experiences, that the practicality which comes from the empirical research. I did have a couple of experience and exposure to certain empirical research. One in the legal field, there is a collaborative LLM which is planned by two universities. That's a Jindal Global School in India, and also there is a National Law School in Calcutta, and along with the King's. So they wanted to establish a transnational an environmental law program in transnational environmental law with a specific objective on trying to understand the transboundary harm. And along with that, I was part of that, the conceptualization and the program. So one of the focus area they felt is that, no, the students who is doing that course has to be given a lot of exposure to certain kind of an empirical research. So the Sundarban, that area is very important for both India and Bangladesh in the context of climate change and other ecosystem management as a wetland. So that area has a numerous consequences. But then the area is heavily affected and impacted by the climate change and other industrial threat. So as part of that program, the kind of the empirical knowledge which is generated. So the point I'm trying to say is that when you are in the field, when you interact, you understand the multiple perspective, the multiple experiences, their lived experiences, which is definitely very, very different from what an academic or the theoretical knowledge brings. Similarly, I'm part of certain NGOs where we are trying to evaluate the possibility of bringing a climate litigation in the context of a drought zone area in India. The climate litigation, as we all know, that it is gaining importance across the world. But even that empirical experiences realize that when you talk to the people, the struggle they have, their lack of knowledge with regard to already existing remedies, the procedural hurdles in terms of that. So one of the core point in terms of enabling that capacity building or encouragement is to get that localized stories. So that can only be possible in terms of bringing. When I say localized stories, it doesn't mean that it is a isolated, self-standing. So that dominant narrative which can be built up to that transnational solidarity, I think the civil societies definitely has to play a very major role in that, the kind of bringing that localized stories. And in a way, I think we have a good platform with the internet, the social media, and the kind of a technological development. It's not like the earlier 20 years back, a local issue doesn't gain an international attention. So today we are in a definitely a very, very much better position in terms of bringing that transnational solidarity. So the moment through that transnational solidarity, the localized stories appear more. Definitely, I believe that the solutions to certain issues also will be not just a global solutions, but it can be much more tailor-made and localized one. So I will definitely emphasize on that transnational solidarity part. But yes, with there definitely a question that the transnational solidarity should not be used as a kind of a prism where the global north civil societies completely tries to dominate. No, this has to be a kind of a coexistence and the co-learning from for both the civil societies in the global south and also the global north. The second point I wanted to highlight is a lack of an area. See, while the interlinkage between environment and human rights are important, but I believe that the transnational corporations and the kind of impact which they have, especially on a lot of global south countries, that's one area the international law and even the domestic law has to come up to bring a certain kind of an accountability. So unless and until that happens, a whole lot of the capacity building, which we talk about, yes, it can definitely, you can provide a capacity building to the vulnerable communities, but in terms of the legal framework itself, a community affected by a transnational operations in global south faces a whole lot of procedural and substantive challenge in terms of even having a remedy to it. I think the international law seriously has to look at bringing an amount of transnational the corporations accountability part to it. The last part I wanted to highlight is the importance of participation in terms of decision making. The participation, not just for instance in the context of EIA, there is an amount of public consultation. So the procedure for that public consultation, how can the communities be prepared for it? So a lot of organizational training, definitely, I mean, the institutions or other academic institution definitely has a responsibility. Judiciary definitely has a responsibility. Multiple stakeholders has a responsibility, because the participation, not just as a kind of an opinion making, maybe participation in terms of decision making, participation to see that their voices are being heard. So I believe that has to be given importance. And in the Indian context, yes, the judicial activism, as the judge from Pakistan has highlighted, more than the legislative framework, it is the Indian judiciary has played a very proactive role. And they have liberalized the public interest litigation. So as early as in 1997, the Indian judiciary had declared sustainable development to be a customary international law. And even before the understanding came in the international sphere, sustainable development itself has been declared to be a fundamental right. So I think, yeah, these are a couple of steps which can be taken in terms of bringing up the capacity of the vulnerable communities. Thank you.
Terima kasih Dr. Sneha Jolie, sangat menarik tadi hal yang bisa untuk dilakukan di dalam membangun kapasitas, kemudian juga partisipasi dari masyarakat dalam konteks HAM dan lingkungan, membawa konteks global kepada konteks lokal. Dan tadi ada yang menarik untuk memberikan contoh atau story bagaimana hal tersebut bisa atau mampu untuk lebih dipahami secara cepat oleh masyarakat, khususnya tadi vulnerable people, sehingga partisipasi dari mereka itu akan masuk di dalam konteks membuat kebijakan juga. Dan terkait dengan, ya terima kasih sekali lagi Dr. Stelina Jolie. Saya akan bergerak ya ke yang offline ini, bahwa deklarasi ya di dalam Majelis Umum PBB 2022 sudah menyetujui sebuah resolusi bersejarah yang menyatakan bahwa setiap orang berhak atas lingkungan yang bersih dan sehat serta berkelanjutan. Nah ini di tengah kita juga sudah hadir dari Kemenkumham, Ibu Harniati, Dr. Harniati. Saya ingin menanyakan bagaimana diskursus hak asasi manusia dan lingkungan hidup ini juga menjadi concern, apakah melihat keduanya secara terpisah atau sudah integratif, dan bagaimana peran pemerintah Indonesia khususnya. Silahkan Ibu.
Ya, terima kasih Mas Dr. Unang ya, bukan Unang pelawak ya. Ya. Tadi pertanyaannya bagaimana sih cara pandang ya sebenarnya Indonesia sebagai negara. Jadi kalau kita lihat dari sisi Indonesia sebagai negara demokrasi dan Indonesia sebagai negara anggota PBB, itu dari sisi hak asasi manusia itu kita sudah meratifikasi hampir semua konvensi internasional tentang perlindungan hak asasi manusia. Jadi tinggal satu yang belum, tentang konvensi penghilangan paksa. Jadi artinya Indonesia secara internasionally sudah berkomitmen dan ingin menerapkan, mengimplementasikan konvensi itu di dalam peraturan perundang-undangannya. Nah kalau kita lihat dari apa yang sudah terjadi, sebenarnya perubahan iklim dan isu-isu lingkungan ini sebenarnya sudah lama sekali harusnya kita tampilkan dalam diskursus dialog publik sebenarnya. Tapi ya seperti yang disampaikan tadi oleh beberapa narasumber, kalau sudah ada jatuh korban baru kita teriak gitu ya. Jadi saya sangat menyayangkan sekali dari Pak Dr. Aditya tadi menyatakan bahwa setiap tahun ada sekitar 6 juta ya yang sebagai korban. Nah ini sangat disayangkan sekali kalau kita lihat tadi bahwa perubahan iklim ini adalah salah satu concern dari pemerintah, seperti yang sudah dijanjikan dalam konstitusi kita Undang-Undang Dasar 45 bahwa hak hidup dan hak lingkungan adalah hak yang harus kita lindungi dari 10 hak yang ada di dalam Undang-Undang 3999 tentang hak asasi manusia. Nah kerusakan perubahan iklim ini banyak masukan dari daerah. Kebetulan saya kemarin dari Aceh itu menyampaikan dalam rangka pengukuhan gugus tugas daerah bisnis dan HAM itu Pak Sekdanya menyatakan kalau kita bicara perubahan iklim bukan iklimnya yang berubah Ibu, tetapi kerusakan iklim oleh manusia sebenarnya baru kita bicara perubahan iklim. Nah mungkin itu dari sisi istilah ya, kembali kepada kerusakan perubahan iklim ini. Jadi ini sangat erat kaitannya dengan perlindungan dan pemenuhan hak asasi manusia, to respect, to protect, dan to fulfill dari hak asasi manusia itu sendiri adalah tugas kami dari pemerintah khususnya di Jenham ya, bahwa di Jenham ini terus terang adalah Dijen yang satu-satunya ya, Kementerian Hukum dan HAM di Jenham satu-satunya kementerian yang kakinya dua Bapak Ibu ya. Di satu harus memajukan pembangunan pemerintah dari sisi HAM, tapi ada satu kaki yang lain kami harus peduli mencakup, mengcover suara-suara dari masyarakat, terutama masyarakat sipil. Oleh karena itu kalau kita lihat dari TUS di Jenham ini, kami terima kasih kami ucapkan kepada RWI yang sudah bekerja sama dengan kami udah puluhan tahun. Makasih Pak Jason dan timnya, dan mudah-mudahan kerjasama ini tetap berlanjut ya Pak ya. Jadi untuk isu-isu lingkungan ini ya, perubahan iklim ini terus terang adalah isu yang seharusnya kita konsen sudah jauh-jauh hari ya, tapi ya memang kondisinya seperti ini. Dan kalau kita lihat dari indeks World Index tahun 2023, Indonesia ini Bapak Ibu termasuk negara yang rentan sekali ya dari sisi perubahan iklim, dan Indonesia dari sisi geologinya juga di bawah kaki kita ini gabungan dari lempeng, 3 lempeng Pak Ibu. Jadi ada nama istilahnya ring of fire itu, jadi dari bawah, dari atas, dari mana saja ya. Artinya kita ini adalah objek dari perubahan iklim dan kerusakan-kerusakannya. Oleh karena itu sekali lagi kami menyampaikan komitmen pemerintah untuk membahas isu-isu lingkungan dan perubahan iklim ini tetap kita sampaikan kepada masyarakat dan menjadi perhatian kita bersama. Demikian.
Terima kasih. Sudah banyak tadi komitmen, kemudian juga beberapa hal yang bisa menjadi mekanisme ya atau alat juga untuk mempercepat bagaimana mengintegrasikan isu lingkungan hidup dan HAM. Mungkin Ibu bisa meng-highlight lebih jauh lagi kira-kira peluang apa yang ke depan yang bisa Indonesia lakukan kira-kira?
Ya, dari sisi Dijen HAM sebenarnya isu-isu lingkungan ini sudah termasuk salah satu ya isu-isu besar ya, karena objeknya kita di kalau kita lihat dari Perpres 51 2021 tentang Rencana Aksi Nasional HAM itu isu lingkungan sudah menjadi perhatian besar ya, tetapi mungkin secara detailnya belum begitu. Tadi disampaikan oleh Pak Dr. Aditya dari BNPB bahwa tentang musibah dan bencana dan seterusnya itu kemungkinan akan kita masukkan ke dalam aksi Ranham di generasi ke-6. Sebenarnya di dalam Ranham ini sudah banyak aksi-aksi yang terkait dengan lingkungan yang dilaksanakan oleh kementerian lembaga, dan aksi ini akan dilaporkan kepada Dijen HAM dan akhirnya nanti kepada Presiden setiap tahunnya. Jadi proses pelaporan dari aksi kementerian lembaga itu dan kabupaten kota juga provinsi ya sampai ke bawah itu B04, B08 dan B12. Jadi sekali 4 bulan dan terakhir kita sampaikan ke Presiden. Nah, selama ini generasi Ranham ini sudah ke-5, dan untuk generasi yang ke-6 2026 sampai 2029. Nah, itu mulai bulan besok, bulan ini ya, bulan Maret, ini udah bulan Maret ya. Kita akan berkejar waktu dengan teman-teman semua ya. Kita akan menyusun Ranham generasi ke-6, dan kami berharap kita bisa memasukkan secara detail lagi aksi-aksi terkait dengan perubahan iklim ya, isu-isu lingkungan ya, kemudian juga green transition dan seterusnya. Nah, ini mudah-mudahan setelah ini kita gerak cepat, mudah-mudahan setelah ini kita akan bertemu lagi. Dan kemudian mungkin bisa disampaikan juga bahwa Kementerian Hukum dan HAM ini tahun 2023 juga sudah mengadakan kegiatan dengan RWI dan donor lainnya terkait dengan workshop international high level meeting ya, setingkat menteri. Kemudian kita juga sudah kerjasama juga dengan RWI ya, ada 3 dokumen yang sudah kita susun bekerja sama dengan RWI juga. Yang pertama terkait dengan peta jalan atau roadmap untuk peningkatan peran Kemenkumham di negosiasi perubahan iklim di tingkat nasional dan internasional, dan ini juga termasuk dalam peningkatan kapasitas dari pegawai Dijen HAM dan stakeholder terkait. Kemudian kita juga terlibat kerjasama dengan RWI dengan penyusunan kertas kebijakan policy brief tentang pendekatan berbasis HAM terkait dengan pelaksanaan kesepakatan kemitraan transisi energi berkeadilan, just energy transition energy ya. Kemudian penyusunan dan peluncuran kajian terkait kontribusi pengakuan terhadap status dan hak masyarakat hukum adat di wilayah pesisir dan pulau-pulau kecil dalam mendukung upaya penguatan adaptasi perubahan iklim. Nah, ini sejalan juga dengan Perpres 51 tadi tentang Ranham, bahwa target dari pencapaian dari Ranham ini adalah 4 aktor yang rentan ya, kelompok rentan. Tadi disampaikan oleh Pak Dirjen, ada masyarakat hukum adat, ada perempuan, anak, dan penyandang disabilitas. Jadi dari kegiatan-kegiatan ini, setelah ini mungkin kita follow up lagi ya, mungkin lebih kepada incongruitnya ya. Jadi bagaimana bisa langsung ke masyarakat yang terdampak. Kira-kira itu, demikian. Makasih.
Terima kasih Ibu Harniati. Tadi disebutkan secara komprehensif bahwa pemerintah Indonesia sudah memiliki berbagai mekanisme untuk integrasi hak asasi manusia dalam konteks lingkungan hidup. Kemudian juga ada beberapa peluang ke depan, termasuk di dokumen-dokumen seperti Ranham versi baru, seperti itu. Baik, nanti mungkin kalau ada pertanyaan lagi kita, ya silahkan sebentar.
Maaf Bapak Ibu, ya tadi saya lupa menyampaikan bahwa di kekinian di Jenham melalui Perpres 60 2023 juga konsen sebenarnya terkait dengan strategi nasional bisnis dan HAM. Jadi ini terkait juga dengan bagaimana kita sustainability dari usaha ya, pelaku usaha dan bisnis dikaitkan dengan perlindungan hak asasi manusia. Dalam artian bahwa kerusakan lingkungan dan isu-isu lingkungan dan perubahan iklim itu sangat mendapat perhatian besar dari Perpres 60 tentang strategi nasional bisnis dan HAM ini. Karena apa? Karena salah satu indikatornya itu adalah ada 12 indikator tadi Pak Dirjen sampaikan, dan salah satu indikatornya adalah lingkungan dan mekanisme complaining mechanism. Jadi bagaimana masyarakat yang termarginalkan atau masyarakat rentan bisa menyampaikan keluhannya atau complainingnya, mendapatkan pemulihannya, khususnya misalnya dalam bisnis dan HAM yang ada kaitannya dengan lingkungan. Nah, ini Bapak Ibu kita sudah membangun mekanismenya sampai ke daerah-daerah, kabupaten, kota, dan provinsi. Nah, melalui gugus tugas daerah bisnis dan HAM yang sekarang ini pengukuhannya sudah hampir 10 ya kabupaten provinsi yang sudah mengukuhkan GTD ini di seluruh Indonesia, dan ini masih dalam proses. Oleh karena itu mungkin melalui GTD ini bisnis dan HAM ini ya, kami berharap kedepannya isu-isu lingkungan, isu-isu perubahan iklim dan seterusnya itu bisa tercakup di sana. Karena misalnya ada pelaku usaha, misalnya pelaku usaha besar mau buka mining misalnya, nah sebelahnya itu ada sawah atau ada sungai dan seterusnya. Nah ini bagaimana ini lingkungan yang dirusak oleh mining tadi, apakah bagaimana complaining prosedurnya, bagaimana kita bisa mendampingi masyarakat yang terdampak ya, people affected dari pelaku usaha ini. Dan ini ada kaitannya dengan diskusi kita pada siang hari ini. Demikian.
Terima kasih. Tambahannya yang menitik beratkan pada fungsi stakeholder lain yaitu private sector, bahwa pemerintah Indonesia juga sudah memiliki mekanisme dan juga regulasi Perpres 60 2023 tentang bisnis dan HAM. Tadi juga dikaitkan dengan beberapa stakeholder lain, dan telah hadir kita di tengah kita juga Ibu Dr. Dina Ruslanjari yang banyak bergerak di isu kebencanaan dan baik di remote area untuk melihat bagaimana praktek-praktek di lapangan terkait dengan mitigasi kebencanaan. Saya ingin menanyakan apakah di dalam konteks kebencanaan juga sudah ada pandangan hubungan antara hak asasi manusia dan isu lingkungan dalam kacamata kebencanaan. Silakan.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Moderator, Pak Dr. Unang. Jadi kalau kita lihat isu lingkungan seperti pencemaran udara, kemudian kerusakan lingkungan serta lingkungan yang tidak sehat atau tidak baik, ya, di mana masyarakat itu tinggal juga di daerah prone area, area-area yang terdapat bencana yang sewaktu-waktu akan terjadi bencana, dan tentunya mereka akan menjadi korban masyarakat itu. Ya, sehingga itu sudah menyalahi hak asasi manusia, karena bahwa masyarakat itu, manusia itu harus tinggal di tempat yang aman, nyaman dan sehat. Jadi ketika kita akan tidak, jadi amat sangat terintegrasi antara lingkungan dan hak asasi manusia, ya, utamanya di dalam mengatasinya, karena saling terkait dan saling berkaitan dan berlingket gitu ya. Nah, sehingga ketika kita melindungi manusia, maka kita juga harus karena di sana ada mencakup perlindungan terhadap lingkungan. Itu jawaban saya.
Mungkin bisa diceritakan Ibu apa saja yang lembaga Ibu yang sudah lakukan, atau peran-peran apa yang sudah dilakukan dalam konteks pembahasan ataupun mitigasi bencana di dalam lingkup HAM. Mungkin kerjasama dengan RWI atau apa saja yang bisa dielaborasi.
Baik, amat sangat luar biasa ya ketika saya kerjasama dengan RWI, kemudian disuruh membuat modul gitu kaitan dengan kesiapan terhadap pengungsi gitu, terkait dengan bencana hidrometeorologi. Jadi ketika itulah saya baru tahu dan baru mengerti, karena Magister Manajemen Bencana ini di UGM ini adalah yang pertama kali ada di Indonesia. Tidak memasukkan hak asasi di dalam penanggulangan bencana. Tidak ada materi yang ada hak asasinya. Sehingga kemudian saya masukkan ke dalam materi-materi hak asasi, saya masukkan kepada beberapa program kurikulum, masukkan ke dalam kurikulum seperti kebijakan. Di sana harus ada hak asasi manusianya dibahas, tentunya bukan oleh ahlinya ya, Prof. Sujito dari Fakultas Hukum. Kemudian juga leadership, kepemimpinan dalam penanggulangan bencana juga harus ada hak asasi manusianya. Kemudian sosiologi dan pemberdayaan masyarakat, di sana ada hak asasi manusianya. Demikian juga dalam pengelolaan multi bencana. Jadi di sana kami baru menyadari dan mahasiswa ingin memperdalam tentang kaitan dengan itu. Karena banyak sekali ketika kita berbicara manajemen bencana, maka ada pra bencana, tanggap darurat dan pasca bencana. Di dalam pra bencana tuh mereka harus tinggal di tempat yang aman. Kalau tidak, mereka harus dipindahkan. Ya, karena suatu waktu tadi ada bencana seperti misalnya bencana gempa bumi dan tsunami. Kemudian harus ada disosialisasikan bencana apa yang ada di sana. Nah, kemudian ketika tanggap darurat, bagaimana pengelolaan bantuan, bagaimana mereka tinggal sementara, bagaimana negara ya atau pemerintah melindungi mereka. Kemudian ketika pasca bencana pun demikian, bagaimana mereka dipindahkan ke hunian tetap. Tentunya banyak hal ya, ketika seperti contoh ketika mereka nelayan kemudian dipindah ke bukit, maka mereka tidak bisa mendapatkan penghasilan. Secara ekonomi mereka akhirnya kembali ke daerah pesisir dan kemudian tinggal di bedeng-bedeng. Itu tentunya negara amat sangat erat dengan hak asasi manusia. Itu, Pak Moderator.
Oke, tadi sangat menarik ketika modul ya. Tadi di awal panelis kita juga membahas pentingnya pemahaman, understanding bahwa dua hal, HAM dan lingkungan itu saling terkait. kemudian memasukkannya di dalam modul, kemudian menyebarkan di dalam konteks policy maker juga, leadership, terus kemudian juga apa saja di dalam penanganan baik pra dan pasca kebencanaan tersebut. Jadi menjawab tadi pengantar dari Dr. Raditya. Ada yang bisa ditambahkan mungkin peluang ke depan kira-kira apa yang bisa untuk mengakselerasi dua isu tersebut masuk atau menjadi concern di dalam kebencanaan, penanganan kebencanaan.
Baik, jadi kami tidak hanya kepada saya berpikir bahwa memberikan pengetahuan kepada mahasiswa saya, mahasiswa Magister Manajemen Bencana di UGM. Tidak hanya itu. Kemudian saya membentuk perhimpunan HIPTI ya, Perhimpunan Magister Manajemen Bencana se-Indonesia, termasuk dari UI, dari Jawa Timur tuh Universitas Brawijaya, ITS, kemudian Unhas dan Unsia, bahwa kita harus memasukkan hak asasi manusia di dalam kurikulum. Kemudian kami juga melakukan pembelajaran gitu ya, sosialisasi melalui Zoom dengan dukungan RWI juga untuk pemegang kepentingan di kota maupun kabupaten di seluruh Indonesia yang rawan bencana. Tentunya tidak semua hadir, tapi itu nanti akan kami lanjutkan secara terus-menerus. Kemudian bagaimana membangun sense of crisis dari pemegang kepemimpinan di lapangan ya, seperti Badan Penanggulangan Bencana Daerah yang telah juga diundang dengan kerjasama dengan RWI juga untuk memberitahuan tadi itu. Jadi kalau ada pengungsi itu harus seperti apa sebaiknya gitu, dan jangan diputuskan secara cepat apakah mereka tidak ada hunian sementara dulu gitu. Dan itu juga kemudian kami bagikan juga, kami ajak mahasiswa-mahasiswa ke lapangan terkait tentang penyintas ya, jadi orang yang telah selamat ketika itu, namun kondisinya setelah pasca bencana itu tidak mendapatkan hak-haknya gitu. Itu dia yang kami lakukan.
Saya pikir diskusi kita sangat menarik. Tadi saya ingin juga menanyakan tantangannya apa kira-kira dan sebagainya, tetapi kita bisa melihat bahwa enabling environment itu sangat penting sekali. Tadi sudah dicontohkan bagaimana membangun sebuah media gitu ya, modul itu mampu untuk menjaring banyak aktor untuk paham terkait dengan HAM dan lingkungan hidup. Untuk sesi ini saya akan cukupkan di dalam panelis kita, dan saya akan membuka sesi tanya jawab. Kita masih ada waktu sekitar 15 menit dan ya 5 sampai 10 menit, dan saya akan membuka 2 pertanyaan baik offline maupun online. Mungkin yang pertama, silahkan di ruangan ini jika ada yang memberikan komen ya. Cek juga yang panelis kita yang online, Dr. sama Dr. Stelina Jolie, apakah masih bergabung?
Yes, I'm here.
Oke.
Yes, I'm here.
Ya, silahkan. Kita punya 4 panelis, mungkin ada pertanyaan. Oke. Yes. Ya, silahkan Pak Jason.
Okay, I'd just like to ask a question. I know that you've all been working in this area, but I just want to try and get an idea about what's changed in the last 7 years in terms of the conversations around human rights and environment. One of the things that we wanted to get out of this session this morning, this one, was a sort of little bit about your own experiences, or if someone wants to take it on is because if we remember 7 years ago, there was a lot of climate denialism. It wasn't that long ago that the people were laughing at climate change and people had to convince it. Now people seem to be reasonably convinced. It's not a matter of how we're going to mitigate, it's now how we're going to adapt. So we've gone from denialism to mitigation to adaptation. So I'm just want to know a little bit more, if someone would like to share some experiences, a little bit more anecdotal rather than professional perhaps, or a mixture of both. Because I think that's really important over 7 years, the language set and what's actually, if we look back, there was a fair amount of denialism.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Jason. Mungkin Dr. Stella Jolie bisa memberikan komentar bagaimana, apakah ada perkembangan diskursus HAM dan lingkungan ini mungkin di konteks Asia Selatan. Nanti kemudian dilanjutkan oleh Hakim Sasib, please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I do not know whether my answer will be explicitly only in the context of Asia, but generally. But yes, as Jason rightly pointed out, there was a lot of denial and skepticism with regard to climate change and various environmental law issues. I think if one has to give a one-liner or two-liner kind of an answer, I believe the scenario which we are witnessing all across the world in terms of the magnitude and intensity of disasters. Like in the Indian context, Center for Science and Environment, one of the most prominent civil society who even influences the negotiation position of the government of India. And also even 92, they were very prominent in terms of bringing the CBDR-RC. So numerous reports has actually suggested that out of the 365 days, more than 280 days, India has been hit by one or other kind of disasters. So, and this is not something of an event. I can say that, yeah, I am not influenced or I am not affected, it is in my backyard. I think we can see whether it is the floods in Pakistan, whether the droughts and floods, landslides in India, Bangladesh, the coastal erosion. So I think the things are there for everybody to see. So I think that makes a very fundamental change in the way that we look at it. And this is also in the background where the non-state actors like civil societies, as I said, the transnational solidarity, where they have become powerful. So even the governments are not in a position to exactly deny, they know that they have to respond to it. So that is where they felt it is imperative that the dialogue and interlinkage with the human rights has to develop. So I think a lot has to do with that, the non-state actors and really what we are witnessing in terms of the climate change and other disasters, the planetary crisis all across the world are actually forcing all different stratas of the society to feel that, yes, there is an issue which has to be tackled. And unfortunately, if you look at it, the entire climate change regime, UNFCCC, Kyoto Protocol, they do not have any social element in the sense that human beings are not the center of those legal regime. Even though the Paris Agreement does incorporate something on human rights, it's mostly in the preamble, not in the operationalization. So this is also a point one has to understand that. So there is a kind of a disenchantment with those regimes, even though nevertheless it is important. But from a vulnerable people's perspective, they somewhere realize that we do not have adequate remedy at the individual or a community level to rely on these legal instruments, right? So we need to find an alternative where where what we are suffering has to be remedied. So that they found out in the human rights mechanism, whether it is at the Human Rights Committee, you can see that the climate litigations, Pakistan has numerous one, even the children as less age as 7 and 9 filing a case for it. there is an interesting case pending before the Lahore High Court where all the petitioners are female. So we have an interesting era of the activism which is going on with regard to these human rights remedies. So I think one change is also the fact that the environmental law regime per se is not very socially in terms of responsive. So that responsiveness they found out in the human right aspect. The third point is, yes, even in terms of the debate on human rights, there is a lot of change. Today, we are not just talking about the present generation, but also we are talking about the future generation. Again, very clear from the multiple litigations which is pending all across the world. From a global north and south, it's not just the intergenerational equity we are talking about, the intragenerational aspects, especially if you look at the Indian context, there was a judgment 2 years back, which gave a new twist to the definition of sustainable development. The judge said, it is not sustainable development that only is important. You can't exhaust the resources on the basis of sustainable development. What we need is just sustainability. So meaning that all sustainable development will not. So the just part, the equity part is also important in the context of sustainable development. So in terms of the discourse, I think the localized segments of the human rights impact has brought into existence the multiple layered vulnerability also. We talk about old age, we talk about youth, we talk about race, caste. So I think there is a, it's a beautiful phase for the human rights there. So there is an exponential way that, okay, you can talk about, it's not just in global north and south, but there are multiple layers which is happening. So I think that's very exciting. Thank you.
Ya, terima kasih. Mungkin ada tanggapan atau silakan dari Hakim Sajib. Mungkin dari konteks Indonesia. Oh ya, oke, Dr. Sajib merespon.
Yes, I fully endorse the views of my esteemed panelists from India. The things are here to be seen. Climate change was a denial in 2017, but now everybody is talking about climate change, and the judicial activism is in full swing in Punjab and in Pakistan. One thing I must, it's a comment, or you can say that it's a comment. There's a disconnection between the policy making and the people who are working on the grassroots level. For example, I am a judge and I'm not involved in the policy making. I have to implement the laws on environment. So my views are not taken into consideration when the policy is made at the top level. So second, my point is that the capacity building of not only judges is very important, but also the field formation of the Environmental Protection Agency at grassroots level. I can quote an example. In Pakistan, there are about 29 million registered vehicles, and that is the main source of carbon emission in Pakistan, I think, and that contributes a bigger chunk of carbon emission in Pakistan. So there is no check or on these carbon emissions from these vehicles. That is the jurisdiction of the environmental magistrate working in all districts. But the EPA is not having the proper equipment to check those carbon emissions from the vehicles. So see, there's a disconnection between the policy making and the people who are to implement the laws. But things will improve, I think, with the passage of time. And if the person who are working at grassroots level are involved in policy making, that will bring a very good change, I think. Thank you.
Ya, baik, terima kasih. Tetapi ini waktu yang sepertinya kita harus mengakhiri diskusi ini. Tadi pertanyaan dari Jason sangat tepat sekali untuk menyimpulkan diskusi di panel satu kita yang sesuai tema, yaitu perkembangan diskursus HAM dan lingkungan di Asia Pasifik. Jadi dari tadi 4 panelis kita sudah menyampaikan apa saja capaian penting dari konteks HAM dan lingkungan, kemudian tantangannya apa saja, dan terobosan yang telah terjadi di berbagai negara, dalam konteks ini adalah Asia Selatan dan Asia Tenggara. Kalau saya boleh menyimpulkan bahwa tadi diskursus HAM dan lingkungan di Asia Pasifik sudah mengalami perkembangan yang cukup baik dalam konteks shifting dari pemahaman kemudian ke konteks operasionalisasi bagaimana integrasi HAM dan lingkungan dapat dilakukan di dalam menjamin hak asasi manusia, terutama tadi diberikan contoh bagaimana vulnerable people dan lain sebagainya. Tetapi yang patut kita highlight tadi dari berbagai diskusi dan pertanyaan terakhir, bahwa konteks memainkan peran penting, karena meskipun secara global dari konteks universal sudah memiliki regulasi maupun diskursus sudah sangat marak ada, tapi di masing-masing negara memiliki konteks yang berbeda. Ada yang tadi disebutkan pemahaman tentang keterkaitan HAM dan lingkungan itu baru didapatkan ketika mereka join adanya training atau capacity building. Kemudian juga masih ada tantangan, yaitu belum adanya enabling environment, ekosistem yang bagus untuk membuat ini menjadi semacam gerakan bersama. Dan ada tambahan tadi bahwa sekarang yang perlu dilakukan adalah diskursus tersebut seharusnya sudah pada level operasionalisasi, bagaimana local segment juga dilihat di dalam integrasi HAM dan lingkungan. Jadi masih banyak tantangan, tapi kita sangat optimis bahwa sudah ada kemajuan di dalam integrasi HAM dan lingkungan di Asia Pasifik, dan kita mudah-mudahan selalu untuk bekerja sama erat untuk mengawal ini. Tadi konteks Indonesia juga sudah banyak instrumen dan mekanisme, dan ini semakin ke depan semakin banyak pekerjaan bersama di konteks hak asasi manusia dan lingkungan hidup. Baik, untuk sesi ini kita akhiri, kita berikan applause buat para panelis yang luar biasa. Terima kasih banyak Dr. Harniati, Hakim Syazib Said, Dr. Dina Ruslanjari, dan Dr. Sterlina Jolie. Dari saya akhiri. Terima kasih banyak. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang dan selamat mengikuti sesi berikutnya. Terima kasih. Thanks.
Terima kasih banyak
Judge Syahib,
Bapak Dr. Unang, Bapak Judge Syahib, Ibu Dr. Harniati, Ibu Dr. Dina, dan Ibu Stelina. Mohon berkenan untuk di panggung dan berdiri karena kita akan melakukan foto bersama antara moderator dan seluruh panelis. Judge Syahib and Stelina, could you please make sure that you still turn on your camera because we're going to take a group picture with all the panelists and the moderator. Boleh tolong Stelinanya keluar? Oke, baik. On 3, 1, 2, 3. Oke, baik. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you very much, Judge Syazib. Terima kasih banyak Bapak Unang, Ibu Dr. Harniati, dan Ibu Dr. Dina. Thank you very much. Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, sebelum kita beranjak pada makan siang, kita akan mendengarkan terlebih dahulu kesimpulan singkat dari sesi diskusi panel pertama yang akan kembali disampaikan oleh Victor Bernard dari Raoul Wallenberg Institute. Kepada Victor kami persilakan.
Hi everyone, sorry, I'm just going to make this very quick. I would like to thank everyone, including our speakers and panelists, for their very insightful presentations, interventions and reflections on the links between human rights and environment. I find the remarks on how the program has inspired academics, practitioners alike to leverage the knowledge and capacities gained from RAPP to advance more ambitious and inclusive climate action and environmental protection particularly interesting. A remark that stuck with me was that to truly institutionalize the knowledge and capacities, we need to change the way we think about and the culture around human rights and environmental protection, which has traditionally been addressed separately. This is something we'll hope to build on in the next program to further embed these two perspectives within the just transition. With this, I would like to conclude this first part of the day, and I would like to thank our audience for tuning into these discussions and taking part in them. I hope you found this part of the event as thought-provoking as I did, but there is more to come, as we will be joined by a new set of speakers in the afternoon who will delve into the diverse strategies and approaches that have been adopted by them and explore how each stakeholder group has uniquely contributed to the broader objective of the regional program. Before that, I would like to invite our offline participants to join us for lunch outside. For housekeeping items, I think Danang is more informed about the exact times and so forth, so I will hand the floor back to him. Thank you.
Baik, terima kasih banyak Victor atas kesimpulan singkatnya dan juga beberapa informasi terkait sesi berikutnya.